His supervisor did not believe him. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was standing in the office, bandaged from his shoulders to his arms, trying to explain what he had seen 3 days earlier in Hiroshima. He told his supervisor that a single bomb had destroyed the entire city. One bomb. Everything, buildings, streets, tens of thousands of people, gone in a single flash. His supervisor looked at him the way people look at someone whose injuries have perhaps affected their mind, and said that a single bomb destroying an entire city was not possible. Yamaguchi was mid-sentence when the room went white. The date was August 9, 1945. The city was Nagasaki. The bomb was the second one. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived both atomic bombings of Japan. He was 3 kilometers from the detonation in Hiroshima on August 6. He was approximately 3 kilometers from the detonation in Nagasaki on August 9. He lived through both of them. He went home to his family. He spent decades mostly silent about what had happened to him. He died in 2010 at 93 years old, having spent the last years of his life trying to make the world understand something that it had still not managed to fully absorb. That one bomb is enough. This is a story about probability, about survival, about the specific weight that settles onto a person who has witnessed the same impossible thing twice. It is a story about a man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi and what the 20th century asked him to carry. In the summer of 1945, the war in the Pacific had been running for nearly 4 years. Japan had been at war since 1937 if you counted the invasion of China, since 1941 if you counted Pearl Harbor, and by August of 1945 the arithmetic of the conflict had become brutally clear. The Japanese home islands were under air raid attack. Cities were being firebombed. The economy was strangling under naval blockade. American forces had taken Iwo Jima and Okinawa in some of the bloodiest fighting of the Pacific theater. The Japanese military command understood that an Allied invasion of the home islands was being prepared and that its human cost on all sides would be catastrophic. Ordinary Japanese civilians were preparing for invasion by manufacturing bamboo spears. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was 30 years old. He was a naval engineer employed by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a company that built ships and weapons and the machinery of a war that was running out of everything it needed to continue. He was married with a young child. He had been assigned to a temporary posting at the Mitsubishi shipyard in Hiroshima. 3 months of work in a city that was not his own, at a job that required his expertise, in a country that required everything from everyone. On the morning of August 6, 1945, he had finished his 3-month posting in Hiroshima and was preparing to return home to Nagasaki. He had packed his belongings. He had said goodbye to his colleagues. He was ready. He had forgotten his travel permit. He turned back to the office to retrieve it. Piece of paper. A bureaucratic formality in a country running out of everything except paperwork. This decision, the small, bureaucratic, entirely ordinary decision to go back for a piece of paper, placed him in a specific location at a specific time. Standing in an open area near the Mitsubishi shipyard, approximately 3 kilometers from the center of Hiroshima, when, at 8:15 in the morning, the sky above him turned the color of a magnesium flare and the air itself seemed to catch fire. Yamaguchi saw the flash. He dove to the ground and pressed his face into the earth and covered his eyes with his arms, and the world above him detonated. The bomb called Little Boy released the energy of approximately 15,000 tons of TNT in a fraction of a second, at an altitude of about 600 meters above the city. The fireball that followed reached temperatures in the tens of millions of degrees. The shockwave moved outward at supersonic speed. At 3 kilometers, the overpressure was still sufficient to hurl a man through the air. The thermal pulse, even at that distance, was capable of burning exposed skin instantly. Yamaguchi was thrown into a potato field by the blast. When he lifted his head, the city he had been living in for 3 months was gone. Not damaged, gone. In the direction of downtown Hiroshima, a column of smoke and fire was rising that would eventually climb to 12 kilometers. The buildings that had surrounded him minutes before were rubble and flame. The sky was wrong. Not dark but the color of bruised flesh, lit from below by fires in every direction. His arms were burned from the wrists to the shoulders. His eardrums had ruptured. He had temporarily lost his sight. He lay in the potato field for a period of time he later could not accurately estimate. Then he got up. Two of his colleagues from the Mitsubishi shipyard had also survived the blast, also injured. The three men found each other in the rubble and began, slowly, to move toward the city's edge. What they walked through in those hours has been described by survivors of Hiroshima in terms that the Japanese language developed specific vocabulary to try to contain. The word jigaku, meaning hell, appeared repeatedly in testimony from people who had no other word available. The fires. The figures moving through the smoke who were no longer recognizable as people. The sound, which was eventually the sound of nothing, because enough of the city had been destroyed that the ambient noise of a functioning urban environment had simply ceased. Yamaguchi and his colleagues found an air raid shelter and spent the night. In the morning, with his burns wrapped in improvised bandages, Yamaguchi made a decision that, viewed from the outside, appears extraordinary and that, viewed from inside the logic of 1945 Japan, was simply what a person did. He went to the Mitsubishi shipyard to file a report. The shipyard was largely destroyed. He filed what report he could. Then, on August 7th, he made his way through the ruins of Hiroshima to the train station. The trains were still running. This fact, that the Japanese rail network continued operating through the atomic bombing of Hiroshima well enough to carry passengers the following day, is one of those details that arrives with the force of something surreal. Yamaguchi boarded a train. The train carried him out of the destroyed city and south and west through the Japanese countryside, through towns that had not yet been bombed and fields that still existed and ordinary stations where ordinary people were still living ordinary lives at the edge of the catastrophe, and delivered him to Nagasaki. He arrived home to his wife and young son on August 8th. His wife, Hisako, had been frantic. She had heard of the bombing of Hiroshima and had not known whether her husband was alive. For 2 days she had not known if she was a widow. He arrived at their home bandaged, burned, largely deaf in both ears, and she searched the city for ointment and medicine for his wounds. He rested. The burns were severe, but he had survived. He was home. Their son was alive. The war, whatever was happening in it, had not yet arrived at Nagasaki. On August 9th, Tsutomu Yamaguchi went back to work. He reported to the Mitsubishi office in Nagasaki. His supervisor, Kinzo Sato, asked about his injuries. Yamaguchi explained. He described the flash, the heat, the scale of the destruction. He tried to convey what he had seen, standing 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, watching a city disappear. His supervisor listened and did not believe him. The idea that a single bomb could do what Yamaguchi was describing, destroy an entire city, 60 to 80,000 people killed in a single moment, was outside the parameters of what Sato understood as possible. Yamaguchi was explaining. He was mid-sentence. At 11:02 in the morning, the bomb called Fat Man detonated above Nagasaki at an altitude of approximately 500 meters. Yamaguchi was, by the geometry of the city and the location of the Mitsubishi offices, approximately 3 kilometers from the Nagasaki hypocenter. The room went white. He survived the second bombing the way he had survived the first, on the ground, protecting his head, thrown by a blast that should have killed him. The Nagasaki bomb was larger than the Hiroshima bomb, and yet Nagasaki's geography, the city sat in a valley, surrounded by hills, contained the destruction somewhat. The hills that had made Nagasaki a beautiful city absorbed some of what the hills around Hiroshima had not been there to absorb. This accident of topography, combined with Yamaguchi's distance from the hypocenter, combined with whatever specific arrangement of probability had governed his survival in Hiroshima 3 days before, kept him alive. His bandages from Hiroshima were blown off by the Nagasaki blast. He was re-injured. His already damaged ears were damaged further. He made his way out of the ruins of the Mitsubishi offices and found, after hours of searching through a destroyed landscape that he had arrived in only the day before, that his wife and son were alive. The family had survived both bombs. Yamaguchi's case was not entirely unique in the statistical sense. Historians and Japanese government records estimate that somewhere between 100 and 165 people were present in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the bombings and survived both. The Japanese word for them is Niju Hibakusha, double bomb survivor. Most of them never came forward, partly because of the stigma that attached to atomic bomb survivors in post-war Japan. Hibakusha faced discrimination in employment, in marriage, in medical care, in a society that found it easier to avoid the subject of what had happened than to confront it. Many of these people carried their double survival silently, telling no one, letting the coincidence of what they had witnessed dissolve into the larger silence that surrounded both bombings for decades. Yamaguchi spent most of his working life in that silence. He raised his family. He continued working for Mitsubishi. He dealt with the effects of radiation exposure, recurring health problems, the uncertainty that shadowed every physical symptom, without speaking publicly about what had caused them. His wife Hisako suffered from radiation-related health effects throughout her life. Their daughter Toshiko died in 2008 from cancer. The shadow of August 1945 extended across 3 generations of a single family. It was not until his 80s that Yamaguchi began to speak. He gave interviews. He wrote a memoir. He testified at the United Nations. He met with world leaders. He said in direct and simple language, the thing he had spent most of his life building toward the courage to say, that nuclear weapons must be abolished, that the experience of Hiroshima and Nagasaki must not be repeated, that the people who make decisions about these weapons have an obligation to understand what they actually are and what they actually do to human beings. In 2009, the Japanese government officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as a Niju Hibakusha, the first and, as of his death, the only person officially certified by Japan as a survivor of both atomic bombings. He was 93 years old when they gave him the certificate. He died on January 4, 2010. Stomach cancer. What Tsutomu Yamaguchi's life asks of us is not a simple question. The straightforward interpretation, the one that most coverage of his story reaches for, is about luck. About the extraordinary, incalculable improbability of surviving 2 atomic bomb detonations in 3 days. And yes, the probability is so close to 0 that the mind cannot hold it without letting go of something. To be within survivable distance of not one but both of the only nuclear weapons ever used in war, against populated cities, in the history of the human species. The mathematics of that coincidence belong in the same category as the lightning and the lottery, except that there is nothing fortunate about the context in which it occurred. But the deeper question is about witness. Yamaguchi spent decades carrying knowledge that most of the world only understood abstractly. He had been inside both of those abstractions. He knew what the flash looked like from 3 kilometers. He knew what it felt like to be thrown into a field by a shockwave. He knew the temperature of air that has been touched by a fireball. He knew what a city looked like after, and he knew it twice, and he carried that knowledge through 50 years of a post-war world that was building more of the weapons that had done it, thousands more, and pointing them at cities and calling this arrangement security. He started talking when he was old enough that dying was closer than it had ever been, and he talked as though talking were the one thing he had left to do. He was probably right. There is a potato field somewhere in what is now the Nishi ward of Hiroshima where, on the morning of August 6, 1945, a 30-year-old engineer pressed his face into the earth and covered his eyes. The field is gone. The city that was destroyed around it has been rebuilt. The Peace Memorial Museum stands near the hypocenter. The atomic bomb dome, the skeletal remains of the Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, still stands near the Motoyasu River with its frame intact, preserved exactly as the blast left it. The only major structure near the hypocenter that wasn't completely flattened, preserved deliberately as evidence, because the city understood that the world needed to be able to see what this looked like. Yamaguchi's certificate of recognition is in a museum now. His supervisor's reaction, the reaction of a man who heard someone describe an atomic bombing, did not believe it, and then experienced one himself seconds later, was never recorded. There is no account of what Kinzo Sato said or thought in the white silence after the second room went white. He survived the Nagasaki bombing and lived into the post-war years, but whatever he said to Yamaguchi in the aftermath, if he said anything, was not written down. Some moments are too precise for the historical record to catch. Let your mind go there tonight. To a man in a room in Nagasaki mid-sentence, trying to explain a thing that his listener thought was impossible. To the specific second before the room went white, when the words were still forming, when the explanation was still in progress, when the impossible thing was only a memory and not yet happening again. To the particular quality of silence that follows a man who has been asked by the 20th century to witness the same catastrophe twice, and who chose, at the end of his life, to use what remained of his voice. He was 93 when he ran out of time to speak. Rest there tonight. In the quiet he spent 60 years building toward.